But the Columbia one is a more difficult one. I think that steps have been taken. I think that impunity has been diminished. I personally believe it's not tolerated within this particular Colombian government. I don't know if President Uribe has done a good job of expressing that. Impunity exists everywhere in the world. It exists in New York City. When one person gets a ticket and another person doesn't get a ticket for the exact same thing because his or her brother is a police officer. That's a form of impunity, right? There's a certain amount that's acceptable within our society. When people are being murdered overseas, and particularly in this case in Colombia, and there's not the reaction that we have in the United States when a capital case of murder is committed, where they're fully prosecuted to the full extent of the law, or it seems as though that's not the case. There are different standards of tolerance, or intolerance in this case, for impunity. I think Uribe has gone through great lengths to address those issues, and it's an ongoing issue. But I think that it's in the interest of the United States to further that relationship and to reward that type of behavior. And I would also suggest, on the pure merits of legislation, they already have 90% duty-free quarter-free access to the United States. We don't have that reciprocation with Colombia, which I think would mean a lot to our manufacturing sector here as well. And just lastly, I'll just mention on China. I had dinner last night with Mr. Li, who was one of the top 20 members of the Chinese government today. It's believed, widely believed that in the next, within the next decade, he'll be one of the top 5 Chinese leaders. We had a great discussion about a number of issues. I bring this up because I co-chair, I chair the exchange between the People's Congress and the House of Representatives. And we'll be making a trip to China at some point, hopefully between now and the end of the year. And the President is actually planning a trip at some point before the end of the year as well. I say that because I brought up last night at that meeting the issue of Section 421. And I know that's probably been an issue of discussion for many of you as well. I wrote the President, I spoke to the people in his cabinet, and I believe it was important that they act on 421. You may say why. Because one, 421 was added to the PNTR legislation to garner additional Democratic support for the bill. And that bill passed because of Democratic support. On top of that, if they failed to move on that, I think it would have sent the wrong message, not only to domestic politics here, and those responsible, primarily unions, that were responsible for bringing that suit in the first place, but would send a very bad message to Democrats who may very well be supportive of free trade agreements moving forward if they believe that even under this administration they would not enforce the agreements that were made in prior administrations. So I believe very strongly that they needed to send that message. And in order to begin a broader discussion on free trade, that message had to be sent. So I think you have to look at that in a more positive way if you've been looking at it negatively. I actually think there will be a benefit by the President invoking Section 421 for the future of free trade agreements going forward and not pushing off and pushing back on possible support for agreements in the future. So with that, once again, I want to thank you for having me here today. Did I cover most of the things? Not all. I'll leave the rest to Kevin. But to let you know that we are working very strongly in the House, Democratic Caucus, and working and talking to the administration and to Ambassador Kirk about the need to move forward on free trade. I know he's anxious as well with the White House. We have a couple of issues. We have health care, we have reg reform, we have a number of issues that are before us that kind of have prevented us from getting onto the broader agenda. But I do believe, knowing how tenacious Ambassador Kirk is, he doesn't take things lying down, is what I suspect. And he's ready and willing and able, I think, to move on this issue within the White House. And we'll be there to support him in the House Democratic Caucus. So thank you all. Thank you, Kevin, again, for sharing the stage with us.